So I'm gonna tell you, a bit more about what the circular economy means, like practically, and what you can all do to make it a reality. So as Councillor Lewis said, we are a partnership between the Mayor of London and the London Borough. So we work with them, we work with businesses and with citizens to help London waste less, reuse, repair, share, and recycle more. So in one word, making the circular economy a reality. And saying things a bit differently, what we want is really to lead a revolution in how we behave with stuff and, in our relationship with stuff, so that we value them more and we make sure they last for longer. But before I tell you a bit more what practically you can do, I've got a little quiz to start with, and it is about climate change and what do you think has the strongest impact on climate change globally. So basically there are two categories. So the first category is our energy systems. So our energy used to produce electricity, for transport and for heating our buildings. And the second category is all the stuff we use and consume every day. So all the food, the material, the clothes, the electrical appliance, anything you can think of. So what do you think has the strongest impact, and what do you think people talk about more? And when asked this question, most people will say is the first category, is the energy system, because when you hear like lots of people talking about climate change, they are talking about our electric system, our transport, and heating our buildings. But actually, when you look at the numbers, so the energy system is actually the most important, but it only accounts for 55% of all the emissions globally. And almost half of the emissions globally comes from all the stuff we consume. So if you focus on changing, like our electricity grids, our transport, and the way we heat our homes, you would actually miss half of the picture. So obviously we need to tackle that too, but we really need to make a change on how we use all the food and the materials we consume, and to make sure that they are valued and they are kept in the system for as long as we can, so that we limit those emissions. And this is really the idea of the circular economy. So as I said, is about going away from what we call the linear economy, which is mainly the world we are living in, where raw material are extracted, things are manufactured, we use them, consume them, and then we dispose of them. So we are starting to recycle more, which is great. But I guess the ultimate vision is where stuff are just kept in an economy that is fully circular, meaning that stuff are just reuse again, shared, repair, and at the end of their life, recycled when you can't have any use of them anymore. So that's the principle. And now I'd like to tell you a bit more about practically what you can do in Sutton. So there are 4 key things that you can do in your everyday life, and that we all should do more. So the first thing is reduce waste, and in particular food waste. The second thing is repair. The third thing is about swapping, reusing, and renting. And the fourth thing is recycling. So I'll go through those 4 key things and give you a bit more details about what it means, and also point you towards a few useful resources that can help you do those 4 things. So reduce waste. And here I'm going to focus on food waste, because this is really a massive challenge for London. So we've just released a report last week at Glasgow in the COP, where we've tried to map the food that flows through London. And what we have found out is that actually more than a third of the food that is produced for London is actually never eaten. So it's wasted either at the farmer level or through the supply chain or from Londoners themselves. But a third of it is wasted, which is massive, especially when you think about all the emissions and the impact on climate change that occurs because of that. And so if we reduce in London our food waste by 50%, we can save more than 10% of our food emissions. So this is really massive, and this is something we should do more. So practically what it means for you, so it's simple things about planning better so that you can use the food by their use date. It's about using stuff that and cooking stuff that maybe you don't know that are edible, like the broccoli stems. And it's about maybe freezing stuff before they use by date so that to extend their life. So very simple stuff. And maybe I should have said that in the beginning. Circular economy is a big word, but everything that we will tell you about today is very simple and small stuff. So maybe you think it's not going to have a big impact, but actually all of those together really have a big impact, and we should all try to make those small changes more in our life. The second thing you can do more is try to repair things to make them last longer. So it's true for clothes, it's true for all your electrical appliance, for your smartphone, etc. And you may not know usually, and I'm one of those person that find it really hard to repair stuff, especially clothes, etc. And I don't have any skills, but you can use lots of materials are out there to help you either do it yourself or find someone else who can help you. So we launched last year a London Repair Week, which happened in October last year, and we'll organize one before March next year, which is about promoting all the repair shops that you can use to repair your stuff when they are damaged. So you can check out on our London Repair Week website. There is a guide with like quick and easy tips for you to repair stuff better when they are damaged. And you can also go to our partners website, the Restart project, that have a directory of repair shops in London where you can get your stuff repaired if you don't know how to do it at home. The third thing is about swapping, reusing, and renting. So when you have something that you don't use, you can, make it available for others, basically. And when you buy something, the idea is for you to try not to buy something new, but try to buy secondhand or try to borrow stuff from your neighbors. So once again, there are lots of ways to do that. I'm going to talk to you today more about the clothes in particular. So in your console, you'll find clothes banks where you can put your clothes that are non-damaged, that are still wearable when you don't use them anymore. And when you want to buy a new piece of garment, think about secondhand. So once again, lots of secondhand charity shops where you can find those stuff. And we at ReLondon, we are organizing a few what we call pop-up shops, where so it's temporary shops where we partner with lots of charities to propose you like secondhand clothes. So I will show you a few images of the last one that we organized, and we are one in the planning for next week, actually happening in Angel, so not that close from Sutton, but it's quite central if you walk close by. So if you want to have a look, this will look a bit like this. So as I said, yeah, the next one is next week, 11th to 14th of November, near Angel. So yeah, if you want to have a look, please come by. But otherwise, you can just find your the closest secondhand or charity shops near you if you want to buy some new piece of garment. And the last thing you can do, which is maybe the most obvious thing when you think about the circular economy, is to recycle more. Have your, your mixed recycling bin, like a separate mixed recycling bin at home. You have your food waste caddy. Lots of the time when people don't recycle is because they don't know what to put in their bin or not. So same here, we have a website called London Recycles, where we tell you exactly what can be or not put in your bin. So please check out on our website whenever you have, an hesitation about what to put in your bin or not. So that's it for the little stop tour of a few things you can do to make the circular economy happen in our city. And just to point you out that we are, because we know that a lot of those stuff are, sometimes it's quite difficult because you don't know, for example, for repair, you don't know where the repair shops are. For reuse, etc., you don't know where to go either. And at ReLondon, we have been working with more than 200 small businesses in London that provide citizens with a way for them to reduce waste, repair, reuse, and recycle more. So we are currently developing an online platform that will be that will gather all those small businesses with their offer, and will be launched in January. So that will be another material where you can go to find some place where that can help you drive those changes in your everyday life. That's it for me.
Thank you, Pauline. Very interesting. I mean, reduce, repair, swap, and recycle. And you did say one of the things you said, which I sort of recognize, repairing. We have lost the skills, but you can always learn them on YouTube. And my proud boast recently was that I managed to refix a toilet not using YouTube, but by watching YouTube. Rather than go straight into questions for Pauline, I think it's probably better if we hear all the presenters, and then we can hopefully have a general conversation. But please do drop any thoughts, comments in the chat, so you don't forget them, and we'll roll from there. But one of the is it Ed next? Yeah. So one of the things Pauline mentioned was obviously swap. Which I guess tees Ed up very nicely. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. I'll just bear with me while I share. Okay, that should be visible. So we're not so much about swapping, more about gifting. So Freegle is all about giving stuff away. But just to initially race through some of the same kind of angles as Pauline was talking about. We consume a lot of stuff in the world, right? And it's doubled in a decade. You might have seen on the news greenhouse gas graphs going up steadily. It's not a problem that's getting any better, and we need to do stuff about it. And the linear economy, which Pauline mentioned, is fundamentally based around taking stuff out of the ground, taking resources out of the ground, making them into stuff, and then throwing it away and buying some more, and leaving the problem of what to do with all the leftover stuff for somebody else to worry about. And it's just not something we can carry on doing. And obviously COP26 highlights the necessity for that, but here we're thinking about things that individuals can do, because that's a meeting of organizations and governments, but there is stuff that we can do for this as well. The circular economy is more like not trying to go in that linear one-directional way where you take stuff out of the ground and end up putting it back in the ground or burning it, putting it into the atmosphere. And there are lots of, sorry, my presentation keeps scrolling. I'll scroll back up. There are lots of steps to that. So some of it is about how we design stuff, and some of it is about how we transport stuff. But what Freegle is about particularly is the reuse aspect of once you've got an item, once you've got an object that's a whole manufactured thing, then you should get the most use out of that as possible before you then potentially try and get it recycled and turn it into something else to go around the wheel again, right? And the idea is that if you design stuff right and you use stuff right and you dispose of stuff right, then those materials can be reused for new devices, but you can get a lot more life out of them along the way. So what Freegle is about is online dating for stuff, we often call it. So it's about putting people who have something in touch with somebody else who would use it. And the key thing, the most important thing to think about is just because you don't want something anymore doesn't mean that nobody would want it. We kind of often make that mistake. Sometimes you kind of look at something and think, oh, I'm sure somebody could use this. It'd be a great shame to throw it away. I just don't know anybody who would take it. You know, my sister doesn't want it. The next door neighbor doesn't want it. I've run out of people to ask. I'm just going to have to throw it away. But also a mistake we often make is to think, well, that's of no use to anybody. And what you're really thinking there is it's of no use to me. But different people want different things for different purposes. If you have a sofa that's got a kind of big coffee stain on it, you might not want that anymore. But if you've been homeless and moved into your first flat and you've got bare floorboards and you need something to sit on, you don't care if that sofa's got a coffee stain on it. If you get that for free, you'll get a free rug and put that over the sofa and you'll be happier. So that's, if there's one thing you remember from what I say, it's stop assuming that just because you don't want it, nobody else could use it. Just try, just offer it and see if anybody does want it. And if they don't, well, then you carry on to disposing of it. So Freegle, we operate all across the UK. There's kind of millions of members across the UK and lots of local communities all around, and we're all volunteer run. So it's a cuddly friendly charity. Just to be clear, we don't pick items up. We're not like a charity shop where a van comes around, picks them up, takes them away. We're just about helping you find the person who could use the item that you no longer want anymore, or who has something that you're looking for. And we put you in touch, and then that person comes around, takes away whatever it is. They're happy because they got a free piano, and you're happy because you got rid of a piano and you have more space in your room. Just earlier this afternoon, I popped on to have a look at what's on offer in Sutton. So these are from this afternoon, and it's kind of, a mixture of stuff. Some of it is spare parts, some of it is leftover bits from DIY, some of it is things that you've found in your shed that you've been keeping until they come in handy and never quite have. Some of it's clothes. We get clothes as well, and all of it is just stuff that somebody else might use. And so really, if it's anything that's physical, then you can offer it up. Anything that would go into a hole in the ground or get burnt, then that's something that you can offer it up, as long as it's legal as well. And we don't take people's partners. Sometimes people offer, a partner who think they'd be better off without. We don't take those. I mean, they might go into a hole in the ground, but that's not really legal. So we don't do that. But yeah, anything physical. And every time we see a skip, our heart sinks. If you look at most of the stuff that's in a skip, quite a lot of that could have been used by somebody, right? Even if you have an office desk that isn't suitable for an office anymore, it could have been used in somebody's shed to just put stuff on, right? It doesn't need the same kind of visual appearance. And so much stuff gets wasted, not just by individuals, right? But by businesses and indeed by councils sometimes, right? So almost, if you're a business, whenever you hire a skip, stop, right? Think about better ways of disposing of stuff before you do that. And it applies to individuals too, right? If you're having a refurb project, then think in advance about whether there are ways you can get rid of your old carpet for somebody to use on an allotment. I got rid of a carpet. I thought it was a bit scruffy, but I offered it up, and the guy who collected it said, it's for my teenage lad's bedroom. It really doesn't matter what state it's in. It's going to be worse by the time he's had it for 5 minutes. It just needs something to go on the floorboards, and I can't afford to buy a new one. So that's the result, right? But if I'd decided in advance that nobody would want it because it was a bit scruffy, then he'd have had to buy a new one and I wouldn't have got rid of it. So anything really, and particularly don't throw it away. It's also worth pointing out for members of the public, fly tipping. So a lot of people, they think, oh, well, I don't want this. I'll put it out on the street and somebody will take it. And then the next day they notice that it's gone. So they think maybe something good has happened. But legally, what you're doing at that point is you're fly tipping. And quite a lot of stuff that gets put out on the streets gets picked up by councils because somebody reports it as a nuisance, and the council van comes along, picks it up, takes it away. You might still think that somebody local has taken it to do a good thing with it, but that's not necessarily true. And obviously, if you put a sofa out in the rain, then that's that sofa ruined, right? So really, you shouldn't be putting stuff out on the street. It's not a responsible way of reusing stuff, and it costs councils money, right? Everybody would love to have more services from the councils or pay less in council tax. And if councils are having to drive around picking up stuff that people have left on the street, that's money that could go to something else more useful. And yeah, we got some volunteers at DEFRA who did a bit of estimating on the amount of money that Freegle has saved, just looking at how much of that stuff would probably have been fly tipped. And it's a significant amount across the UK for a kind of low budget charity like us. So recently we've been paying quite a lot of attention to councils and trying to work with them. Councils are kind of quite geeky. I'm a geek, so I don't say that as a bad thing, but they kind of like to have data and what the impact is and where there are hotspots for things going on. And these aren't things necessarily that that members of the public, you know, if you're a statistician, it might float your boat. But generally, the reason that we shove information towards councils and kind of send them newsletters is to reach the residents, reach people like you, right? Because councils, they spend a lot of time dealing with waste, and a lot of time engaging with the public. And we want members of the public to think before they throw things away. So in some areas, we've got Freegle mentioned on the bin collections, because that's a kind of key way of communicating with residents and helping them, you know, if they're thinking, oh, where can I get rid of this thing? Well, just before you think about taking it to the tip, taking it to the recycling centre, think about giving it away instead. And Essex, who are a lovely county council for us, communicated to their residents by putting stuff on the side of bin trucks, right? So there's a better thing that can happen to a lot of the stuff we throw away, right? Once you put it in the bin, once you take it to the tip, it gets contaminated, right? It might get, you know, a bit of leftover curry all over it, and that's that item of furniture ruined, right? It might get wet, and those clothes are not going to be usable by anybody anymore. Once you've combined it with other stuff, you can't use that object as much, and it's a waste. So the main thing Freegle does is this business of connecting people, allowing people to give and get stuff all for free. We do other fun stuff as well. So in Brighton, one of our volunteers, Kat, who is supposed to be speaking this evening, she built a house out of rubbish. So it's a kind of called the Waste House. They took all sorts of ridiculous stuff. Here we go, like denims and bicycle inner tubes and old video cassettes and so on, and made that into a house that meets building standards and uses things for insulation. And it just shows that even if you can't do anything with that object as it stands, you can still do something better than recycling, because by the time you're recycling, you're smashing something up and hoping you can make something out of the pieces, more or less. And there's a step before that. And another interesting thing we did again in Brighton, the council were getting rid of a building, downsizing that building. And so we Freegled the building, well, not the building, but everything in the building. So all the office furniture, all those filing cabinets, all those desks, all those chairs, all that kind of stuff, that's stuff that the residents have paid for, right? That's their council tax. They paid for that stuff. It's morally, it's theirs, right? So what the council did was we gave it all away. And it turned out to be cheaper to do that than to employ a clearance company to clear it. And it meant that lots of good organizations, schools, charities, businesses got value out of that, whereas otherwise it would just have gone for commercial recycling, smashing those items up a lot of the time. Okay, we've been going about 10 years. Most common stuff that you'll have on Freegle is household goods, quite big stuff, but it can be small stuff as well. Your routine white goods furniture, but sometimes it's something like 300 wine bottle corks or giant African land snails or World War II air raid shelter. Really weird stuff. And the benefit of this, it's hard to measure. And some of the things are kind of more about the life-changing effect that it can have on somebody who's very touched to see, for example, if they're clearing their parents' house after their parents have died, it's heartbreaking to have somebody with a van turn up and take everything and chuck it in the back, and you know they're going to fly tip it halfway around the corner. If it's going to people who will you know, find a home for it and give it some use, that's a nicer way to deal with that. But it all adds up. We have quite a big impact over the years. So that's Freegle. Don't throw it away, give it away. Don't assume that somebody wouldn't want it. Just see if anyone would want it. And if nobody would want it, then you might call a bulky waste connection, or you might put it in the bin or put it in the recycling. But think first, right? And it's a lovely thing to do. Every time you offer something up like that, you make somebody happy. People get stuff that they wouldn't otherwise get, and it helps the planet, and there isn't another planet to help. So this is the one we need to focus on. And that's me.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ed. And yeah, online dating for stuff, I quite like that. And I also like the Freegling the building, which I think, I know Sutton's got a number of buildings that are in the process of being worked on. So maybe that's something we should be looking at. Again, same, thank you. So thank you very much for that. As I say, we'll come back and have a more in-depth conversation. Now, what we're waiting to hear from David, basically, chair of the Circular Economy Club. Over to you, David. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lewis, and very nice to meet everybody this evening. Yes, I'm David Greenfield. I'm going to give you a little whistle-stop presentation through some drivers for the circular economy, some of the things that I do, and some practical things. So a bit of a mix of what Pauline and Edward have been taking to. So what is circular economy and who's it delivering it in practice? And I was introduced as a visiting professor. I've got a number of different roles. I'm not going to bore you with all of those, but it does mean that I can talk from very many different perspectives. What I will do is tell you a little bit about what I do on a day-to-day basis. So SONEX is a research and innovation practice that I set up 7 years ago. And we work with councils, we work with central government, we've done work with ReLondon, and we work across waste management, circular economy. We've just been working with Tower Hamlets on how to design new buildings so that flats can have recycling in them and it's easy for people to recycle. I'm mainly going to talk to you about the Circular Economy Institute and the Circular Economy Club. Circular Economy Institute is the parent organisation, and we what circular economy is. I'll tell you a little bit about some of the certificates later, but we're a global organisation, and we run training courses online, and we have different levels of specialism based on people's interests. Aligned to that is the Circular Economy Club, and it's again a global network, and these are where our clubs are. We have 280 clubs across the globe, and each of these cities or communities, as we like to call them, are really about trying to bring people together in that neighborhood, in that city, that are interested in circular economy or interested in sustainability or interested in recycling, any of the facets that sit within the circular economy concept, which is very broad. And we have a nice community and a nice network in that city. And then we're linked globally as a network. I run the Circular Economy Club in London, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in a second. I also run the Circular Economy Club in Brighton, which is only down the road, and represent the Circular Economy Club globally as well. In the UK, we've got 25 clubs, 26 clubs actually now. I've forgotten one on here. So it gives you an idea of where we are. And we've got volunteers that are running these clubs, and we link up closely with ReLondon. We link up closely with Freegle. This is my volunteer team, and we've got specialists in fashion, in reuse, in finance, and there's all of the details if you're interested. It's free to join the club, and we host events every month, either virtually or face-to-face. We also do some practical stuff. So over the last 3 years, we've been creating a circular economy map of activities that are happening across London. So this is fashion, food, electronics. This came out of a global activity that we did in 2018, where we mapped circular economy activities across the globe and put it all onto a database, and then made that available to everybody across the globe. We were lucky enough to be shortlisted for a UN Sustainable Development Goals Award. And we've been keeping this map going for the last 3 years, updating it every now and again. So there are resources out there that help you understand who's doing what. And I know Pauline and ReLondon are bringing something together on this, and that's one of the key things for circular economy, making sure that people have got the right information. You can see this is some of our past face-to-face events. There's a lot of food, there's a lot of drink, there's a lot of people. We really try to bring an eclectic mix of people, whether you're an academic, whether you're a resident, whether you're a councillor, whether you're just somebody interested in circular economy. We try and open it up so everybody can understand it and participate, and everything that we do in terms of the events we try and make as circular as possible. So the picture in the middle, you can see that people are eating out of cardboard boxes. That food was rescued an hour beforehand from local restaurants. So we catered for about 100 people using an app called Too Good To Go, which, if you like to save food waste, that's a very good app, and there are others out there. But what I wanted to talk to you about is climate change and circular economy, because the two are interlinked. You're all here because you are interested in knowing about what we can do about climate change. And for me, one of the key things is about next life design thinking. Now, that might be for a product manufacturer, that might be for a car designer, that might be for you going shopping. Always think about the next life. What's happening to whatever you purchase in its next life? So let's just have a think about some of the big picture stuff. This for me is probably one of the scariest statistics or quotes that you'll see, and it takes a bit of time to actually sink in. This was written in 2015, and it says that 75% of the infrastructure, i.e. the buildings, the roads, the sewerage, that will be in place on this globe by 2050 does not exist. So over the next 28 years, essentially, we're going to be growing the concrete buildings by 2/3. That is this huge, huge amount of energy, resources, concrete, etc. And where the circular economy comes in, this is a quote from European strategy. 80% of all environmental costs are determined at the concept and design phase. Now, as residents or as councillors, potentially, the influence you might have on this is quite limited. But again, it comes back down to what you're buying, what you're purchasing, how you're building things. 80% of the environmental cost is predetermined at the beginning. So just consider that. And I'll give you some examples of some of the reasoning why circular economy came along. And this is sadly, sorry, somebody's off mute. Would you be able to go off mute for us, on mute for a second? Whilst this is one of my favorite slides, actually. Edward said he's a geek. I can do geek as well. This is the consumption habits of the Americans. And if you look on the left-hand side, you've got an orange dotted line. That's the telephone. And in 1900, 7% of households had the telephone. By 2005, just about 95% of households had a landline telephone. That's taken 100 years to get from 7% up to 95%. If you then look at the cell phone in the late 70s, early 80s, it's gone from 0% up to 90% within 15 years. And this is what's happening in our world at the moment. We are consuming things so much quicker, and everything is becoming a much shorter adoption time. And again, when you think about what you buy, think about whether you need it or whether you want it. A lot of the things that we buy, we want, but we don't actually need. And that's where circular economy comes in, starting to think about what happens to something at the end of its life. How many lifetimes has it got? One of the key things that sits in there is planned obsolescence. A lot of companies design things so that we can't use them afterwards. I do a lot in electronics. I'm going to show you one of my projects a little bit later. But again, when you're buying stuff, whether it's games consoles, whether it's TVs, whether it's all types of electronics, phones in particular, think about how long you can actually have them for. In some cases, you can see some of these have only been designed for 1 year. Whereas in nature, you look at many of the products that are on the left-hand side in orange, many of these products will last significantly longer than some of the very expensive, very high quality materials and electronics that we have actually created over the last few decades. Pauline's already mentioned clothing. Again, this is something that is a change in society, and you'll have noticed this individually. This is from the States again. In the 60s, 10% of an annual salary was spent on apparel, so clothing, and you could buy 25 items. Fast forward to 2010, 3.5% of the annual salary is spent on apparel, and you can buy 70 items. And only 15% of it is being recycled. So we've gone from a society that actually really doesn't spend much on clothing to something where we can just buy because it's so cheap. Frankly, I don't think I've bought 70 items in the last decade, let alone in 1 year. And most of those will have been secondhand. So think about what we consume and why we need to consume it. So it comes back to this point: what do we want and why do we need it? And I use this quote quite a lot, but sustainability, I think we all know about. Sustainability is trying to generate less harm to the environment. So it's trying to react to what's already there. Whereas with circular economy, what we're trying to do is do good to our ecosystem. And Edward's mentioned it, Pauline's mentioned it. A lot of that is around design. A lot of it is around our consumption. I won't go into detail on this because there's a lot to take in here, but we use 5 business models. How can you be circular? So renewable energy, bio-based materials, recyclable inputs to things that you buy or use. Have you gone renewable in your energy at home? There has been problems, of course, with the collapse of number of energy firms over the last few months, but try to do the right thing. Can you recover useful resources? So we've talked about reuse, we've talked about recycling. Can you extend the life of something? How long has your washing machine lasted? How long has your mobile phone lasted? How long has your TV lasted? Try and keep those going as long as possible. Again, with furniture, upcycle, all of those activities. We've heard from Edward about sharing platforms, gifting platforms. Try not to throw things away. Try to actually share. And then start thinking about how you consume. Product as a service is a really interesting avenue. So I'm sure many of you rent your phone. You're actually renting the use of the telephone and the internet rather than physically owning a phone. Same with the car. You don't see any TV adverts now advertising the cost of the car. You just see the cost per month. And that's because we're starting to move to a business model where you can rent things, going back to the 1970s, and when you rented your TV and got deposit returns on bottles. These are all things that help a circular economy. I'm going to whiz through this one because this is quite scary. This is a material matrix. So household waste along the top, different types of household waste and different treatment methodologies, everything from preventing it down to landfill, and using the international language of the emoji. Big green smiley for what you can do as the best way of managing it, and an angry red as the worst. And the reason why I show this is because different materials have got different ways of being managed. So if you look at garden waste, we all know that prevention is the top of the waste hierarchy, but for garden waste, the only way you can really prevent garden waste is to concrete over your garden, which is not very good for the wider biodiversity. So we want to generate garden waste because that's good for the natural environment. So when you're thinking about your materials, your waste, think about, can it go in the recycling? Can it go into the composting? Can I prevent it? Can I reuse it? Think about it as individual materials or individual products. And that fits very nicely into the life cycle of stuff. It needs to be designed. We need to think about the materials we use. We want to think about the construction methodologies, the use, and what happens at the end of the next life. And London is a hotbed of circular economy startups. So I'm going to just take you through a couple of those. So you've got some ideas of things you might want to do or you might already have been doing. Toast Ale currently brew their beer with wasted bread from a bread making factory, substituting naturally grown materials with material that would have been wasted. Very tasty as well. Another company that's based in London called Not PLA, they've decided that actually plastic water bottles are a bad thing, as have many of us. But rather than just saying it's a bad thing, they've gone on and designed a capsule that you can pop into your mouth and it dissolves, and all of the liquid that it contains is actually then drunk. This is essentially product as a service. So you need your thirst quenched. You don't need a plastic bottle to do that. You need some liquid. So you pop this in your mouth and you have had your products as a service. Another London company, Biome, that are making building products out of food waste. So on the left-hand side, you've got the squares, which are brown and wheaty coloured. They're taking coffee grounds, orange peel, agricultural waste and making internal boards out of them. They're then taking mushrooms and mycelium, which is the root structure of mushrooms, and creating housing insulation. And this housing insulation is carbon positive, natural material. And they've just launched in the last week some new lampshades, which are made entirely out of food waste and an organic resin, which is biodegradable. Really quite exclusive design called Obscure. You've also got a company that's making flat wine bottles, and these were designed so they could be posted through the letterbox, made out of 100% recycled plastic, made to be completely recyclable. And what they also do is it actually minimizes the amount of transport required. So 6 normal wine bottles take up the same space as 10 of these Gasson wine bottles, which means that from a climate change point of view, you're transporting 40% more volume in the space of what was previously 6 wine bottles. Think about when you're having parties and going out to friends or going for picnics. What are the products that you're using? Are you taking plastic, or can you actually get biodegradable or compostable products to use? Or take, really what you should be doing is take your crockery out, but that's not always practical. So think again about what materials you're using. Think about what you need. Library of things, there's I think 8 now around the city. Many people haven't got space for a steam cleaner or a hedge trimmer or a bread maker. Therefore, can you use them when you need them? Do you need to have that drill sitting in your garage being used once a year, or should 200 people use that drill 200 times? So again, I think about consumption. And I'll just finally leave you with one of my projects down in Brighton. We've started this called Tech Take Back, and it's the Revalue Electrical Service. We're running a pop-up in London in a couple of weeks' time in the city to collect unwanted small electricals, mainly computers. So we were lucky enough this year to be awarded the Business Green Circular Economy Project of the Year and are a finalist in the National Recycling Awards for 4 different activities. We launched a year ago this Friday, and we've collected 26,000 small electrical items that weigh 22 tons. And we've got 5,500 of those back out into the local community, some via Freegle, some directly with other charities. We've got 270 laptops back to refugees, school children and other needy families. As a small example, as I said, we're running an event in the City of London, the Square Mile, on the 26th, 27th and 29th of November. Finally, if you're really interested in circular economy and want to actually learn a lot more in detail, these are the certificates that you can apply for online. It's a fully online training program. You can see the prices and the content there, and you guys get a discount if you want one. If you are interested in this, please do get in contact, and I'm sure Sarah will be able to share my details. And finally, how can circular economy slow the impact of climate change? Think about the next life of whatever you're buying before you buy it. Consider the end at the start, understand the life cycle, determine the resources you consume, try and reduce those resources, but fundamentally do what you can. Nobody's going to be perfect to this. It is very much around doing what we all can do to make a small bit of difference, because collectively that will make a huge difference. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, David. Now, I'm not going to say the only bit I took out of that was the flat wine bottles that you can keep in your back pocket, but it did leap out at me. No, it's fascinating. We're going to go to a Q&A session, discussion session. So I hope you've all got lots of questions. And I think, is there a hands up function on here if you want to speak? Anywhere?
I'm not aware of a hands up.
Well, there's a reactions, isn't there? So there's a reaction. So if you want to, I suppose if you want to speak, yeah, there's a raise. If you look at the bottom of your screen, there should be a reactions button, and then there's a raise hand like that. So if you want to go there or put in the chat. But a couple of questions from me, first of all. And like lots of people, I'm sort of half looking at it now. I've got a pile of electronic items, sort of old phones and stuff that I know I should do something with, but I'm not quite sure what to do. I'm concerned about the data that I've got on there. I mean, there's nothing that personal, nothing that, but you know, if someone gets hold of it, it's got dates of birth and all that sort of stuff. So I'm a little bit worried about that. And of course, also electrical items. I noticed on Freegle, you do sort of, I think vacuum cleaners was number 19 or something in the giveaways, but there is that risk, that danger if you're giving away an electrical item to, you know, how do you make sure it's safe? Who's responsible for that? So I don't know if David can sort of talk about the recycling of phones and data stuff. Yeah. And I think also it's something I just nudged to Sarah. We should possibly start to look at in Sutton. We have got some minimise space perhaps that we could use, and I know it's a project that David's been heavily involved with in Brighton. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And addressing that point of data, that was actually one of the reasons why we co-founded this. So Kat, who was also meant to be speaking today, was one of the co-founders with me, along with an IT guru. And I'd spent a year working in a corporate IT data erasure company, and we were taking computers and mobile phones from banks and from local authorities, data erasing them to government standards, and then reselling them to get some income. But there was nothing for residents. And my background's local government. I've worked in local government for the last 25 years. So we set up Tech Take Back to do exactly that, to offer residents the opportunity to safely be able to reuse their end-of-life tech. And it struck a chord in Brighton. It struck a chord in London. we started off with a pop-up shop, and every single one of those items. So we've actually, in the last 12 months, data erased 7,952 data-bearing devices. I know that because we are exceptionally good at auditing every single item that comes from every resident. But we also take vacuum cleaners as well. We've actually got 12 out to residents. But what we do, which is slightly different to Freegle, and I'll let Edwards mention that, every single electrical device that we pass out for reuse, so we've passed out 5,500 in the last 12 months. If it's data bearing, it's been data erased to government standards, and there's a certificate available to prove that. And it's also been PAT tested. So we actually make sure that it goes out safely. And that's because we've set it up to do the best we possibly can. It's a huge amount of effort to do that. Let's not beat around the bush, but we're trying to do the right thing with it. And if we can't reuse it, it's then being disassembled. And we've just taken 3/4 of a ton of printed circuit boards today to be chemically recycled. So the gold and the platinum and other rare earth metals can be extracted and come back into the circular economy.
As far as Freegle's concerned, we don't physically possess the items, right? So we're not in a position to do any checks on them. We have a disclaimer, so we say to people, you know, just common sense, really. If I got an electrical device from my sister, I wouldn't necessarily assume it was safe. That might say more about the relationship I have with my sister, perhaps, than the electrical device. But you know, if it's a pair of step ladders, you go up it the first time a bit gingerly just to try it, right? Just be sensible. Right? But it's not something where, because it simply couldn't function, right? If we had to electrically PAT test everything, then it just stops being free. That becomes a full-time job. But yeah, if you just got something from somebody, then just be a little bit cautious about how you use it. Use a bit of common sense for those kind of items. As David says, the wiping of data it's a big thing that puts people off, right? But the analogous thing that puts people off for a lot of other stuff is that, oh, it might come in handy. Right. And you should kind of have a timeout on that. If it hasn't come in handy in a year or two, then really it's not going to come in handy again. You should just give it to somebody else who could use it right now. And then when you come to need something like that a bit later, then you just ask on Freegle and get one then.
Yeah.
Now that certainly it might come in handy is something that I'm very, very guilty of. But though in fact my sister's just gifted me a 50-year-old camping table that she'd kept for the last 40 years because it might come in handy. Finally decided to get rid of it, and now I've got it. Has anybody got any questions? Would anybody like to join in, contribute to the conversation? I've got a question about sort of old and new sustainability. So when I was a kid growing up, jumble sales were a big thing. I was involved with the Scouts, still am, and it was always a great way for fundraising, but also it was, you know, a brilliant means of recycling. And I suppose this is to Ed and Pauline, really, because you're sort of almost, you know, Pauline's pop-up shops, Ed's recycling, you're almost like the modern jumble sales. Have you ever thought, is there a way you can combine your technology and still get the jumble sale with the community feel, with the fundraising for local organizations as well?
So we do have physical events from time to time. So we have give and take days, which are like that, where people turn up and leave stuff and turn up and take stuff. And that's kind of like a free jumble sale. So it's a jumble sale without the sale aspect. And that's something which some councils organize. One of the things that we try to do on site is to try and make it kind of friendly in a community. So we do have some features to try to spot, for example, if people are maybe not so reliable as some other people and those kinds of things, to try and make it feel more like a reliable community. It gets a bit hard, like David was saying, if you're trying to track everything, right? So sometimes, you know, some people will take a big job lot of stuff and then Freegle it all. But that can become quite a time-consuming process. Pauline?
Yeah, and on our side, we that is definitely something we could do. I guess on the case on our pop-up shop, what we do, because we work with charity, etc., we kind of select the clothes. There is like a lot of kind of sorting process to be done between the the clothes banks and the clothes that are really reusable and wearable. So we do that steps to only have like good quality products in the pop-up shop. But we are open to support any communities that would want to do like a more kind of like a sharing system without all that kind of back office process, basically. So yeah.
Could I add to that as well, Pauline? Because I know what you've done in the past, and there's a number of these across the city as well. There's a clothes swap, so people can actually arrange a group of people to bring items that they don't want anymore. You can buy a ticket, you get a glass of wine or whatever it may well be, and you bring your clothes in, and then you swap them with other people's. And in many cases, they have repairs there and sewing there, as just to help run something like that. So they're available as well. And I think they're probably more moving towards the modern jumble sale. There's so many different things, and of course, what we shouldn't forget, particularly in the world that we live in now, is that vintage shops and charity shops do actually play a huge part in replacing what was the jumble sales. I know when my mother used to take me to the jumble sale in the 70s.
Did she ever get a price for you, David?
Yeah, it wasn't very much. But there were very few charity shops on the high street then. And I think that's what's changed. The charity shops, the jumble sales have moved into the charity shops, which is again another way that our society is evolving.
Thank you. A couple of questions have come up in the chat. So a question from Julio, thank you. Or Julio, I apologize if I messed up the pronunciation. Question re electronic devices, do they need to be in good working condition? Because it's really hard to repair them sometimes. I was trying to find someone who would repair my DVD player and was told it's cheaper to buy a new one. And that is the problem of today's economy, I think.
Yeah. So a couple of things on that. For Freegle, no, right? We quite like broken stuff. We have quite a lot of people who like tinkering, right? So I used to live in Edinburgh, and there's a guy on there. He would regularly take broken laptops off Freegle, fix them, offer them back up as working laptops, because he was retired and it just kept him busy, right? And he knew how to do that stuff. So for Freegle, as long as you say what state it's in, that's the most important thing. It's for somebody else to decide whether they could make use of it. Don't assume that just because it's broken, somebody else wouldn't want it. There's also repair cafes, right, or restart parties where people with those skills will volunteer, and you can kind of take along items, and then they'll see whether it's something that's easy to fix. Maybe they'll fix it there. Maybe they'll signpost you to somewhere else that can fix it. It's not reasonable to expect that all of us can fix all the things we have, right? So it's always going to involve some other people some of the time.
And from our point of view, we accept anything, whether it's working or not working. And if it is such as a DVD player where it is cheaper to buy a new one, what we normally do is we do a bit of a diagnostic to determine how easy is it to repair something. And if it is uneconomical, then actually what we do is disassemble it and try and get the various different metals and materials off for recycling, because not everything is able to be repaired. There is a finite lifetime on some things, and sometimes it's bits of damage. I've been saying for the last 15 years, when you go and buy white goods, for example, try and get white goods that are long lasting. I bought a Bosch dishwasher 12 years ago. It went wrong a couple of weeks ago. I got the repair specialist in. He said, sorry, your heat exchange is gone. That's going to cost you 360 quid. My labour's another 200. And then you don't know what else you're going to have wrong with it. And immediately it's going, okay, it is cheaper to buy a recycled one. So we're never going to be in the position where everything's repairable, but do what you can.
There are some things you can do. So there are some campaigns in this area. So there's campaigns for right to repair legislation, but that does come down to how things are designed, right? That's one of the really tough ones. And one of the other things that's mentioned in chat actually is smartphones, which are particularly bad, right? Because they're almost designed that you're going to have to upgrade them in 18 months, 2 years, right? And there is a campaign, for example, called the 10-year smartphone, which is aimed at trying to design in smartphones being long lasting. There's a thing called Fairphone, which is designed to be modular and enable you to replace things like the screen and so on yourself, just with a normal little screwdriver. But at the moment you pay a premium for that, and that needs government fundamentally to legislate for things to be forced to be more repairable, because there's no incentive for the manufacturers to do that.
Yeah.
And sorry, David.
I was going to say, I might as well add to the smartphone question there. This is current. This is where I have to go back to my proper background rather than a corporate one. There are very different mobiles out there. So this is an iPhone 6S. This is the last model that is supported by Apple in terms of regular checks. This is the iPhone 5S. That is no longer supported. I've also got all of these, some of which are very old, very vintage. There isn't a huge amount you can do with those other than recycle them, but we do try what we can. So we're working with some of the much older analog mobile phones to use them for charities, particularly homeless charities, where all they need is the telephone. They don't need the smart elements of the telephone. So there is a bit of a see what we can do, and if we can't do anything with it, let's get the most materials as possible out of it.
Though I guess hold on to one or two for when they're making those films in 2050 that are for 2012, and you've got the right kit available.
Yeah. And but not everybody needs to hold on to it.
No. Hugh in the audience would like to share some comments on PAT testing that might help others. So Hugh, over to you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, it's just that I'm involved with a charity where we get all sorts of electronic equipment in and have to try and check whether it's safe. And one of the things that comes out from doing that is that the biggest fault condition is that either the cable or the plug is either badly wired or is sort of loose, the screws are loose inside, or the cable is damaged. And these are all things that anybody could identify just by inspection. The actual testing is, for most electronic things, very, 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 very does it fail. So that it's just a question of inspection. And this is mentioned in the health and safety information about PAT testing and such like, because everybody thinks that it's sort of got to be a highfalutin specialist who can do PAT testing. Yes, that's true to if you like, stick a label on it. But for the average person and the average bit of equipment, doing the inspection is very much the best thing you can possibly do.
Couldn't agree more.
Really. Sorry?
I couldn't agree more, Hugh. I think the problem we find is that many people just really aren't motivated to do that. And that's because they want the new thing in many cases. And this is where the culture is, we need a bit of culture change, that actually, if something's not working, try and find out why it's not working. But not everybody can do that. I know my mother, whenever I ask her to look at something electronic, she goes, no, I'm not going to go anywhere near that. And some people are never going to be like that. So I think it's very much around, if certain people know that their skill set is doing one thing and not playing around with electronics, then that's absolutely fine, because somebody else will either take it off Freegle or take it to us or to any of the other charities, and hopefully it will be given a second life. I think the key thing is, if you've got a product that possibly has got a second life, rather than throwing it away, try and find an outlet that gives it an opportunity to have a second life.
Do we also need to consider looking after stuff and maintaining stuff? I mean, doing a little bit of prep for this meeting, I went down a bit of a rabbit hole, and it took me to a site where it's talking about putting your jeans in the freezer to clean them and look after them, and you shouldn't wash your jeans. And someone said they hadn't washed their jeans for 12 years or something along those lines. But one comment was quite interesting. It says it took me until I was well into my 20s to take care with my clothing. I used to leave my jeans and other clothes in a twisted heap on the floor or thrown over the chair. When I started hanging them up at night instead, the jeans magically started to look a lot better for a lot longer. Now, I must admit, I still throw my stuff on the floor. I'm not particularly good, but, and it's not just clothes. I mean, we almost don't bother cleaning our cars because we know that we're going to trade them in the next 3 years. Whereas 20 years ago, every Sunday morning, people were out cleaning their cars. Do we need to look at how we take care of stuff? Or is the problem that stuff is so cheap that we really don't give a monkeys, and we spent £3 on something, we'll just throw it away, or how do we change that culture?
I think it's definitely something we need to do more, to value our stuff and to maintain them. And I think also when we buy something, we need to consider, the lifetime of that thing. So maybe, when you have like two choices between like a cheap pair of jeans and an expensive pair of jeans, it can look that the expensive pair of jeans is actually, from an economical point of view, not the best idea. But actually, if it lasts, like 3 or 4 years or more, or even more, like 15 years instead of just 1 year before being damaged, then it's, actually, like from an economical point of view, it's much better. So
but one of the problems is that it's really expensive being poor, right? So there's that famous Terry Pratchett thing about how if you had more money, you could buy a decent pair of shoes, and if you don't have the money, you have to buy 10 pairs of shoes and they're all rubbish and your feet are still wet. So there is a limit to what you can do to maintain stuff if you can't afford to buy the reliable things in the first place, which I guess is me plugging Freegle again, right? Because you may get something off there that's more reliable for less money than something you could afford to buy. But yeah, it's partly a problem of design though. So a lot of things are designed not to be maintained, right? Because they kind of know that people will use them until they fail and throw them away, which is horrific.
Yeah, it is. I think it's, again, coming back to what I said, do what you can. If you can maintain whatever you own, then go for it. If you can't afford to maintain it, then use platforms like Freegle, use opportunities to try and get better quality stuff that will last longer.
Thank you. Sorry, Katrina was on my screen and now she's disappeared. No, there she is. Katrina, you had your hand up for a long time. Sorry.
I wasn't sure if you'd seen it, so I was going to type it instead. I work with Sarah at the council, and I just wanted to raise a few things that the council have been doing as well. So we have on our website, and Sarah, I'm sure, can send the link round, both a reuse and repair map. So we're trying to map opportunities in the borough and places where people can go. But I agree wholeheartedly with the comment around kind of the electrical goods and things like a CD player where it's broken. But yeah, so if anyone is aware of other things that we can add to that map, please do let us know. You've got Sarah's email from address, or the team's email address from the invites that Sarah sent tonight. The other thing I wanted to touch on was, David, you mentioned around kind of repair of clothing and swapping events and things like that. And I'm sure Sarah can add more to this, but we have been undertaking some of those with our cultural services colleagues. So in the libraries have recently had some clothes swap events and also some repair events. But yeah, we're always on the lookout for more to do. So if people are interested in hosting things, definitely get in touch, because we'd be keen to hear what people would like to do and how we can support that.
If I can just add to what Katrina said about the clothes swaps, for those that haven't seen in the chat, the lady who runs it, she's called A Stitch to Wear. She's doing one not this Saturday, 20th of November, and she's hosting that at the Sound Lounge. They're great events.
And the Sound Lounge, for the Sutton residents who don't know, is at the bottom of Sutton, the old Royal Bank of Scotland building. It's well worth a visit, vegan cafe, and they've got a music stage, lots of events. So yeah, do pop along. Would anybody else like to comment, ask a question? You know, we have got three experts in the circular economy here. Say what they're going to be doing. Sarah.
So particularly in David's presentation, but also with the Freegle house, it seems quite clear that the technology and the innovation is there to reuse anything in a quirky, practical way, to stop making things from new. And I wondered what the panelists thought the biggest barriers were to stop this happening faster.
It's because the people who produce things don't pay to dispose of them, right? So you produce something, you sell it, you get the money, and somebody else has to pay to dispose of it. So fundamentally, I think, I mean, it's a really big societal change to change that, right? But until the person who manufactures it is responsible for the cost of disposal, they've got no incentive at all to make that reliable, right? They've got incentive to make it reliable enough to make you buy it and then break down, right? And then buy a new one. And that's the big issue, so far as I'm concerned. You get some kinds of polluter pays schemes, but we should think of waste as like pollution in this respect, right? The polluter is the manufacturer. The polluter should pay to dispose of it when it's finally been finished with.
It's starting to come in, but it's not coming in fast enough. So extended producer responsibility came out of the DEFRA Resources and Waste Strategy. It was published in 2018. And by 2023, we're going to see a lot more opportunities for the producers to start paying for the recovery of things. We're already starting to see with plastic bottles, plastic bags. I don't know if any of you have an Ocado delivery, but they're taking plastic bags back now. Co-op are now doing that. And we're starting to see more and more materials being taken back. There'll be, I'm sure, a zero waste shop somewhere in Sutton that has probably got TerraCycle, where you can take your crisp packets back and everything like that. So I think that is the key thing. But what we're starting to see is that we are starting to see manufacturers starting to understand how they can design things so they can be recycled or reused, because they're starting to get the pressure from the public. And if anything that you can do to put pressure on your supermarkets, on your clothing suppliers, to actually make them realize that you care about climate change and you care about them not wasting stuff, that can only be a good thing.
I mean, you mentioned Fairphone earlier, and I know I did look at that when I was thinking about upgrading my phone, but it was more expensive than the standard phone. If we do have the polluter pays for things, products like phones and other products, and I mean, what would the sort of cost be that's added to the retail price of the product? We're talking 10%, 20%?
It very much depends on the product. And I think the Fairphone is a really good example of the concept is brilliant. The phone works really well, but the price point puts a lot of people off because it's actually very well built. And to have something very well built means you actually have to spend a lot more money on it. And this is the problem. We've got this dichotomy in our product lifetime that you can go to Tesco's and buy something really, really cheap, or any other store that's there. And you might need to replace that every year or every other year. But because it's cheap at the point that you buy it, it makes more logical sense than investing in something that's going to be around for 4 or 5 years. And because, and I think somebody made a point earlier, because you're bombarded with upgrade your phone, upgrade your house, upgrade your car, upgrade your clothes, it's all about trying to keep up with the upgrading culture. And actually what you need to do is start thinking about, or what we need to get people to think about is what they actually need from their products. I've got a very nice Apple MacBook Pro, which is refurbished. The only reason I upgraded mine is because I actually had too much stuff on my old one and the computer wouldn't cope with some of the programs I was running. So I needed to upgrade, but I'd had that laptop for 5 years. So this is, again, our culture. We need to think about what is it that we need to do rather than what is it that we want to do or think we should be doing because everybody's telling us we should.
Maybe to add up on the producer responsibility, I think that the real important thing is that well, for now, basically the costs are borne by the local authority that treat the waste at the end of their life, and the producer doesn't have any incentive to make their stuff more recyclable or reusable. And by shifting the cost, basically, in terms of the system, it shouldn't cost more, from a consumer perspective, because basically, like what you pay in your council tax now, it's already, it's the consumer that is already paying now. But by having that cost shift, it means that the producer has an incentive to make their stuff, more recyclable and reusable, because they will pay less, like through this kind of producer responsibility scheme. So it's really important that this cost is basically borne by the people that can make something about, how recyclable and reusable the stuff they put on the market is.
I think that's the important point, really, that Pauline makes there. The cost exists, right? It's just not borne by the right people. So in Fairphone, they're bearing the cost of kind of not disposing of it. And I think, this is slightly science fiction, but it will happen. There will come a time when your bin gets collected and some AI sorts through all the stuff and works out which brands and which manufacturers generated that waste, and
it's already happening. It's already happening.
Okay. Good, because and that's doable. It's not quite happening throughout, but that kind of technological solution is how you close that loop, right? Because then you can prove that there's that much stuff, and the council can just charge the manufacturers back. Long time before that goes into legislation, right? But there is at least some possibility there of a future where it doesn't have to be the local authority who bears the cost.
We're starting to see that, for example, and this is me getting really nerdy, so I apologize in advance, but for the last 20 years, when you're recycling that you put out at home, it will go off to a material recycling facility, and they use infrared there to separate different polymers of the plastic, so you can detect one type of polymer from the other and it separates it. What is starting to happen, and this year in particular, since COVID, actually, we're now starting to see robotic arms being used that can actually separate different brands on the picking line. So you can get your Coca-Cola bottles going into one hole, your Pepsis into another, and your Schweppes into another. And all of that is about trying to maximize the amount of plastic that's being recycled, or the material that it is. The problem we've got is actually, it's been mentioned a couple of times by all three of us, recycling is good, but recycling should be the last resort when it comes to the circular economy. We want to reuse it as much as possible. We want to repair it as much as possible. But when you do put something out for recycling, try and put it out as clean as possible, because that means that there is less cost associated with recycling it. And I know I got a lot of people when I was a recycling officer quite a few years ago at the council saying, oh, we can't clean out all of our old pots and bottles and everything like that because I just use more hot water. And I said, well, you normally have a sink where you have water in it when you wash your hands or you wash your pots and tubs. Wash out your recycling in the old dirty water. It doesn't have to be spotless. I've heard some people put their recycling in the dishwasher, which is frankly ridiculous, but yeah, it's whatever you can do.
Thank you. I must admit, I do a bit of both. Sometimes it goes into the dishwasher. Sometimes it might just get a quick rinse and chucked in, and sometimes nothing happens at all. Lots of comments in the chat talking about, we've got some TerraCycle points in at Sutton Library and 3 drop-off points in the borough. Various comments about your space Sutton having a 0 waste point for refile, and there's also been some links to various resources that were mentioned by Pauline and others. Sarah, I'm guessing you're going to be able to pull those all together and just sort of send out a summary email to everybody with the current links. With Freegle, I encourage you all to sign up. I signed up earlier today. Yeah, no problem at all. I must admit, a couple of weeks ago, I'd signed up to Olio, which is sort of a competitor, but Freegle's free. Olio is £1.99 a month. So I think I'm going to start saving some money there. Want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank David, Ed and Pauline for their contributions and their insights, and introducing it, I think we are all aware of the circular economy, but just telling us a little bit more about it, a little bit more that we can do, even something as simple, which I will try, the slicing of the broccoli stalks, see whether that works. I'm a little bit dubious about that because I'm slightly George Bush on broccoli, but we shall see. A couple of things on Sutton Council. I mean, just worth pointing out that some of the positive projects that Sutton are going ahead with. Refill Sutton, which is businesses pledging to refill water bottles for everyone in the high street who needs drinking water, so that reduces plastic use. Smart bins are coming in. TerraCycling repoints has been mentioned in the chat. Reusable nappy cashback scheme. I know for our first child we used reusable nappies. Reusable nappies. The second two we went on to plastic ones, whatever they are, disposables, because it was a hell of a lot easier. And one last little plug here. So the council's launching a new community environmental champion scheme. Because you're here, I guess you're interested. If I can ask Sarah to send out in sort of the post-meeting email details of that. It's basically the blurb I've got here. It says it's a great way for anyone who is keen to learn more about the environment, as well as those who want to support or drive more action in the borough. No experience necessary, and champions will come together to collaborate as well as to learn and develop more projects and opportunities. There's no minimum time commitment, and champions can participate as much or as little as they wish. And I think it's coming together sort of from about the 12th of November, isn't it, or something I saw somewhere. So yeah, I urge you please to sign up. The more people we get involved, the more we can do. There's been 2 new messages in chat, which are okay, just from Julio to Sarah. So okay, cool. Has anybody got anything else they'd like to add? So we bought it bang in on time. It's 8:30. Go and have a nice flat pack bottle of wine. Well, thank you all very much for coming. And thank you to our presenters.
Thank you very much.
Very much.
Cheerio for now.
Good evening.
I know.
Good night.